to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be replacing all of the brake lines on this K1200LT. We're going to be replacing the factory rubber brake lines with some aftermarket stainless steel braided lines. The reason we're doing so is the factory lines have an internal liner that over time and with age, the brake fluid kind of breaks that internal liner down and your brakes will begin to fatigue and eventually your hose will pop. It's not a matter of if it'll pop, it's kind of a matter of when. So on the right side of your bike, you'll have the two brake fluid reservoirs right here and here. Before we get started, we're just gonna suck all the brake fluid out of these reservoirs so that just will minimize our mess later, and we're gonna have to bleed the brakes with fresh fluid regardless. So these two on the top here should be able to get off with your thumb, and we'll just loosen those. And then I like to use one of these remote control car. They're meant for nitromethane for RC cars, and it works really good for brake fluid. So you can shove your hose down there and then suck out old brake fluid. So we'll suck all our reservoirs dry, and then we'll get to putting the brake lines in. Okay, so we'll start with the rear master cylinder first. We'll just start right at the brake foot lever and work our way back to the caliper. So with a 6mm Allen, you're going to undo these three bolts right there, holding your foot peg on. And then behind your foot peg, you have these two bolts holding your rear master cylinder on. You're going to want to pull those off, and you're going to want to loosen this nut right here, the banjo bolt, or sorry, this bolt right here, the banjo bolt that holds your brake line on. And then your new brake line will go right there. And then we'll remove our banjo bolt on top of our master cylinder here. So then with a 6mm Allen, we'll undo our second banjo bolt just below the rear top shock mount. And then there's our first line. And then be sure you've removed all 4 crush washers. There's 2 on each side, and we're replacing those with 4 brand new ones. So you're gonna route this one the same exact way your factory line was routed, right onto here, behind the frame, and right down with that 90 on the master cylinder there. So when you're putting these in, you have to remember to replace both of your crush washers. So you go crush washer like that, through your brake line, and then a crush washer on the other side. So there's a crush washer on both sides of the banjo fitting. And then we'll install that right in there. And then before I tighten this up, I'm going to install it onto this plate. And then after it's installed, I'll tighten up that top banjo, make sure the stainless steel line is routed correctly, and then if it needs to be adjusted, I'll show you that procedure next. The next line we're going to be doing is going down to our rear caliper. So it'll unbolt here with a 6mm Allen. You'll need to cut the zip ties holding the speed sensor wire in. It goes all the way around. There's a zip tie there, zip tie there, zip tie there. Comes up, there's a zip tie right there. And then with a 6mm Allen, it bolts on right there. So we got our old brake hose out right here. And we'll be replacing that with a new stainless steel one. So we got our line bolted on right here, our brake line and our wheel speed sensor going down, going through this front clip, down again, through this clip right here, and then around, and then our brake line will go right there with our old banjo and 2 new crush washers. And then afterwards, we're gonna replace all of our zip ties that we had removed earlier. So now we're all done with the rear, and we'll move along to the front. So the front, we'll tackle the front right side first. So there's a 6mm banjo here, a 10mm nut here you're gonna have to remove, along with cut all the zip ties here, here, and here up the brake line. And then the brake line is gonna bolt right here on this banjo. It's a 6mm. It's kind of dirty. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. But right here, there's another 6mm. You'll just have to fish your wrench up in there, unbolt this 6mm, cut all those zip ties, unbolt this 10mm, unbolt that one, and then here's our new brake line. So our new brake line is going to go on the caliper there. The junction block, we have a new brass one. On the inside of this junction block here, there's a flare fitting factory steel line. These steel lines we are not replacing, just these rubber hoses here. So again, you'll undo in here this 10mm, 2 6mm on either end of the brake line, and then you'll cut all the zip ties. Where the factory steel line in here butts up to this junction block, you're gonna need an 11mm wrench. And then we'll cut all our zip ties up the line, holding our front wheel speed sensor on, being very cautious not to cut the wire. And then with a 6mm, we're gonna fish it up in here. So here's our old line, and here's our new line. So we'll just route the new line right up the same way our old line was routed. So we'll just route this right up the exact same way the factory line was routed. Put the stud right through the hole in our junction block. Be sure to get our factory line, just get it started. We don't need to tighten anything yet. We're just gonna get everything kind of started first, so it goes on there nice and smoothly. We're not forcing anything, and our lines are all nice. So we're gonna just get everything loosely assembled. 2 new crush washers on the caliper, 1 on each side of the banjo, just like before. Use our 11mm and get this steel line on the back here started. Make sure everything's all routed properly and clean like. So we'll go around and tighten up all of our connections. Make sure everything's tight and our crush washers are all crushed. Another trick is if your brake line kind of spirals up like that or isn't flowing very nice after you have everything tightened, you can take a pliers and go on this little part right here. When I do it, you'll see this area right here straighten up. So you're just going to take this and kind of untwirl your brake line. So we have this one tight, this one tight, this tight. On the back side where the steel line comes into this junction block, we got that tight. We have this tight, and up top here, we have that tight. So let's move on to the next line. So now moving on to our left side, it's kind of the same principle that we've been doing. We're gonna loosen up this 6mm banjo bolt, and then up here, there's the factory steel line right here, which bolts to a little junction block, like you can see that on our stainless steel one. So what we're gonna use is a 14mm wrench on the hex right here, and an 11mm wrench to loosen up this flare fitting. And then we'll just have to cut this one zip tie, this 6mm banjo bolt here, and then just loosely put it all together, and then tighten her all up as one unit when it's all together. So now I'm going to be replacing the last and final line that connects from the master cylinder at your front brake lever on your handlebar, goes through this plastic handlebar cover, and then it connects right in here, just about 2 inches above from the line that goes down to the calipers here. So what you're gonna have to do is with a 3mm Allen, you're gonna have to remove this handlebar cover. So I just have a setup like this, and I'll shove this. You can feel the bolt heads engaged, and you can just twist them on out. Just like that. So in order to access our banjo bolt right here, which is in the way of the handlebar, after we have our top handlebar cover off, we're gonna have to remove, there's a screw right there we're gonna have to remove, and then underneath here, there's a screw that goes right into there. We're gonna have to remove that. And then also, there's a screw right behind there that we're gonna have to remove, and underneath, there's a screw that goes into there that we're gonna have to remove. So once we have all 4 of those screws removed, we can fold our switch housing down. Then we're gonna loosen up this 4mm Allen. Then that way we'll be able to tilt everything up, gain access to this banjo bolt, loosen up this banjo bolt with a 6mm Allen, and then we'll just fish our new stainless steel line and just follow this line all the way under, and it's gonna bolt right there, right above where the line went to our front master cylinder. So again, it'll end right here, loop around, go up this handlebar, and then end right here. Then we're gonna have to loosen up our switch housing and tilt it back in order to gain access to that. With a 6mm Allen, we'll loosen up this banjo bolt. So with a 14mm wrench, we're gonna loosen up the flare fitting on this brake line up in here on the factory brake hose. So we'll get that loosened. It's kind of hard to see in there, but it's just above the last line you did that went to the front calipers. So once you have that loose, it should come off by hand. Pull that out of there. Fish our line through from up top. Now we have our front master cylinder brake line removed and we're ready to put our new one in. We will then fish our stainless steel line right down the exact same way we pulled our other brake hose out, and we'll get it right down under here. And then get it right up to there. So then we'll tuck it all in here just like it was factory. So then right here where our old one came into, we're just gonna get that started and then we'll tighten that up with an 11mm wrench. New crush washer, one on each side of the banjo, and then you thread it on in. Then we'll flip our handlebar right back down. Put it right back down to where it was. Make sure all your throttle cables and everything stay inside this plastic handlebar cover housing. Make sure everything's routed correctly. Your throttle cables especially, you don't want your throttle cables to be binding or get caught on anything to where it's gonna potentially cause a stuck throttle situation. Make sure our throttle still moves smoothly, that tight. And then reassemble our switch housing here. So if you remember how to do this from before, it's pretty straightforward, but it can be a pain if you haven't done it a whole bunch. So the first thing we're gonna do is get this big switch plate in there, and then we're going to replace this screw, and then our little screw right here goes right there. We'll replace that one. So snap this up in there. It really goes on one way. It should have some kind of a positive snap when it gets reinstalled. Make sure our throttle isn't binding and everything functions the way it should. Put our screw back under here. And then finally, this screw underneath here. We will now reinstall our top handlebar cover. So you have to be this little thing right here, goes in that square hole there. So you kind of have to slide that in. It only goes on correctly one way. And once it's on correctly, those two 3mm head bolts will line up correctly. Thank you so much for following along my brake line install video. If you have any other viewer video suggestions, please mention it in the comments below. Again, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also check the links in my description for my Patreon and PayPal. Thank you very much. Have a safe ride.